How could it have happened? How is it possible for Hamas to so easily penetrate one of the most surveilled and secure borders in the entire world? Joby Warrick is a national security reporter with the Washington Post and one of the authors of this article. Joby, thanks so much for being with us.
No, pleasure.
Let me begin with that question because it's the one that everyone was asking at the beginning. How could this have happened? What did you undercover? What did you discover in this article?
Well, a lot of attention up to now has been on Israeli intelligence failures, and there certainly were quite a few of those, and they've been covered ad infinitum. What we looked at instead was how Hamas, this organization that lives kind of in a cage. I mean, they're living in an area where there's really very difficult to get in and out, very hard to get supplies. How do they pull off something so sophisticated? And one of the things we found was that they very carefully set this up over the course of years, at least 2 years, as far as we can tell, doing things to lull the Israelis into a sense of false security, refraining from involvement in military attacks. Their ally in Gaza, this group called Palestinian Islamic Jihad, would frequently send rockets into Israel, as both groups used to do. But Hamas was kind of pulling back from that. They were making signals that they wanted to work on economic development. They were governing the place, for goodness sake, so let's try to improve the economy. And the Israelis were ready to buy that. And there were even we learned some suggestions that Hamas was ratting out some of its more rambunctious neighbors within Gaza, telling the Israeli security forces about it. All of it, telling the Israelis or giving the signal that they were on a different track, and they were not interested in war anymore, when in fact they were planning something of historic proportions in terms of its scale and intensity. One
of the other things you discovered in having read the article, I found this fascinating. One of the theories at the beginning was that, of course, in this particular case, Hamas is, Iran backed, but you're suggesting in this from your report that this was something they had done, Hamas, on their own without necessarily even informing or letting their allies know. Is that correct?
Yeah, it seems a bit crazy, but all these groups have their own agenda. One thing they have in common, speaking of groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, and then, of course, some of the other militia groups in Syria and Iraq, they get heavy backing from Iran. But the Iranians are often content to kind of let, 1,000 flowers bloom in a way and just let these groups kind of work out their own local plans and agendas. And in this case, there was a lot of coordination, it seems, within, in the last couple of months and years, with groups thinking about some future operation against Israel. But Hamas, in this case, appears to have just gone off on its own, sort of jumped the gun a little bit, partly because they thought the others would join in, figuring that the West Bank would become inflamed and there'd be fighting there, that Hezbollah would be compelled to come in. Did not expect that they'd be left alone, which is what happened essentially, at least up to this point, in this particular case.
Yeah, and there's also a reference, if I understood it, to a prisoner of war, a Hamas member who had been in Israeli custody and basically was listening all the time, embedding himself kind of in a way in what was actually being planned or what the Israelis were doing.
Yeah, here's a guy who had a front row seat to Israeli society for a couple of decades because he was in an Israeli prison. He was released a couple of years ago in a prisoner swap, but he became sort of an expert on Israeli media and culture. He's very, very fluent in the language. And he understood the Israeli psyche, and he understood that one thing for sure is that they wanted to forget about Hamas. They wanted to concentrate on more serious threats, Hezbollah to the north, the West Bank to the east, and let Hamas just kind of do its own little thing. And he was able to essentially help persuade them that this was Hamas was not something for them to worry about. And the Israelis really let their guard down. They had intelligence gathering stations and in place, but they really weren't paying close attention. And Hamas was able to speak through code and use communication channels or word of mouth and passing notes in tunnels and other ways that the Israelis couldn't understand or see. And that really set them up for being fooled in a very big way.
I was struck, Joby, by the fact that, you discovered that while this may have been years in planning, as you touched on there, it was unbelievably horrific and simplistic in its intention. The orders were kill as many people and take as many hostages as possible. Tell us about that discovery.
Yeah, and that's a quote from one of the notes that one of the fighters or terrorists was carrying when they went over the top on October 7. It was we kept looking and thinking we'd find more sophisticated weapons or things that the Iranians had given them, but it was 9/11-like in the sense that, it was very simple technology in the sense that, didn't take great weapons or any new technology to do this. They just planned very carefully. They had their forces lined up. They had very good operational security so that the word didn't leak out. And then they came over with assault rifles and RPGs and things like thermobaric RPG rounds, which means that you've got something that instantly turns a building into an inferno with 2,000-degree temperature, meant to essentially destroy all human life or all life within a structure. So those are things they came over with, and they had sort of the aspiration, the ambition of getting hostages. But, as you guys alluded to in the opening here, it wasn't just about hostages. They could have gone out and just grabbed a few soldiers and come back in. But no, they were looking to restart the entire Palestinian fight, which they felt had just gone very badly. There was the possibility that Israel was going to reach some kind of accommodation with the Saudis, and then everybody would forget about the Palestinians. Hamas wanted to change the subject and do it in a dramatic way, and that's exactly what they set out to do a month ago.
As to the timing, and this is interesting as well, some people say, well, this has to do with what's been going on internally in Israeli politics. Perhaps that played into it. Did it?
It did to the extent that Hamas thought their moment was right. They've been watching, as all of us have, the domestic unrest in Israel in the last few months, and some of the reservists, saying they weren't going to work, they were going to stay home in protest of the Netanyahu government's policies. So they saw that, but they also saw what they thought was a softening of the Israeli mentality, that Israel was less likely to really risk a ground incursion, that they're probably going to respond, strongly, but they didn't see the kind of block by block fighting that the Israelis are doing now. They didn't really think the Israelis had it in them. So they were reading lots of things, and some of them accurately, and some of them they just frankly got wrong and overreached.
Yeah, and they thought they were prepared to carry, I think you said this right off the top, to carry this on for much, much longer had it not been shut down originally.
Yeah, so we've got something like 30 groups heading off in different directions, and some, each group had its own specific instructions. Take this kibbutzim or this military base, take hostages, kill as many as you can. But others were to the south and to the east were going further. And we had this couple of groups that went as far as about 15 miles to the east of Gaza, which is about halfway, half the distance to West Bank. And they had enough food, enough ammunition, enough supplies to last them for several days. And the maps they carried make intelligence officials believe that they were planning to go all the way to the West Bank, which symbolically for them, linking Gaza, this one Palestinian enclave, with the other bigger one in the West Bank, would have been symbolic. And we think they also believe that they could really bring the West Bank Palestinians into the fight. If they got that far, if they got to the border, then their brethren in Ramallah and other places would be compelled to join them.
I just have one last question, and I don't necessarily know there is an answer to this. There are 200-plus hostages still being held. Were you able to determine what the ultimate plan here, what's the objective here with these people?
Well, in the last 2 or 3 days, there's been all kinds of talk about hostage releases and some kind of deal for, a temporary ceasefire or something that would allow some of them to go home. It all seems, very nebulous to us right now. The one thing that's more remarkable really is the fact that you don't see or hear much from the hostages. Mm-hmm. Hamas has been content to let that sort of die into the background while the focus is on the Israeli attack and the atrocities at hospitals and all the things that we're paying attention to now. But they're not putting hostages up or doing as they threatened beginning, killing them, which they talked about doing in the very first days. But they've essentially made them go away. So we're not thinking about them or sort of seeing their faces or hearing them on video except very rarely. And that seems strategic as well. They've got a big card to play, but they're very, very conscious of public opinion on this. And so they're trying right now to sort of tread cautiously and to make sure that they keep at least a big chunk of the world opinion on their side.
Joby Warrick over at the Washington Post. Really, for those who want to know, it's quite the article, and it outlines so many different things. Joby, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Really enjoyed talking with you. Best of luck now.
All right, there you go. Want to check it out if you want to know more. It's in the Washington Post. It came up beginning of this week.